The rain came without a warning that night in Seattle. The streets shimmered under the orange glow of streetlights, water pooling around the tires of passing cars. Inside a sleek black car, Evelyn Grant sat in silence. The windshield wipers moved back and forth like a metronome marking her thoughts. Steady, empty, mechanical. She had just left another charity dinner she barely remembered attending. Another night of smiles that never reached her eyes. When the traffic light turned red, she leaned her head against the cold glass. Through the blur of rain, she noticed something near the convenience store on the corner, a small movement beneath the flickering sign. At first, it looked like a pile of discarded blankets, but then one of them moved. She blinked, squinting through the rain. There was a boy, thin, drenched, maybe 13. He was holding two tiny bundles against his chest. The car idled. The driver glanced back in the mirror. "Ma'am, do you want me to keep going?" Evelyn didn't answer. She was watching the boy. He adjusted the wet blankets, whispering something to the babies in his arms. They were crying softly, a fragile sound that somehow carried through the noise of the storm. A woman ran past with an umbrella. A man cursed as his shoes splashed through a puddle, but the boy stayed where he was, shielding the babies with his own body. Evelyn's fingers tightened on her handbag. The driver spoke again. "Traffic's clearing, ma'am." Still, she didn't move. Her chest felt heavy, the kind of weight she thought she had buried years ago. She reached for the door handle. "Stop the car," she said. The driver hesitated. "It's raining hard, you'll get soaked." "I said stop." The tires screeched softly as the car pulled over. Before he could open an umbrella, Evelyn stepped out into the downpour. The cold water hit her face like needles. Her hair clung to her cheeks, but she kept walking, slow, determined, heels tapping against the wet pavement. When she reached the boy, he looked up in shock. His eyes were wide, afraid. One of the babies let out a weak cry. Evelyn knelt beside him, her expensive coat darkened by the rain. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. He didn't answer. His lips trembled. "They're cold," he said finally, voice small. Evelyn looked down. The babies' faces were pale, their breath shallow. She reached out without thinking, touching the edge of one soaked blanket. "How old are they?" "7 months," he whispered. "My sisters." Something in his tone, the quiet pride, the fear, went straight through her. She looked around. The street was empty again, only the hum of rain and the faint buzz of neon lights. "You can't stay here," she said. He shook his head quickly. "We can't go anywhere. They'll take us away." "Who will?" He pressed his lips together, eyes darting toward the street, as if expecting someone to appear. Evelyn didn't know what he meant, but she could see the truth. If she walked away, those babies wouldn't survive the night. Her driver called from behind, holding an umbrella over her. "Miss Grant, please." She raised a hand to silence him. Then she turned back to the boy. "Get in the car." He froze. "No, please. I'm not stealing anything." "You're not," she said softly. "You're coming with me." The boy hesitated, then slowly stood, clutching both babies close. Evelyn guided him toward the car, shielding the tiny faces from the rain. The driver looked uneasy but opened the door. Inside, the warmth hit like a wave. The boy sat on the edge of the seat, dripping water, eyes darting between Evelyn and the sleeping twins. He looked like he might bolt at any moment. Evelyn wrapped her scarf around the nearest baby, careful not to startle him. No one spoke for a while. The sound of the rain against the roof filled the silence. Evelyn glanced at the boy. His hands were trembling from cold and exhaustion. She wanted to ask questions. Who he was, where he came from, how he ended up here. But something stopped her. For now, the only thing that mattered was keeping those babies alive. She turned to the driver. "Home," she said quietly. The car pulled into motion, taillights glowing red through the storm. Evelyn leaned back, watching the boy rock the babies gently, whispering something she couldn't hear. She had no idea that stopping her car that night would change not only his life, but hers. The drive home was silent, except for the soft hum of the heater and the steady sound of rain. The boy kept his eyes on the babies, whispering under his breath every few seconds, as if his voice alone could keep them safe. Evelyn watched him from the corner of her eye. His arms were thin, trembling from exhaustion, yet he never loosened his hold. When they stopped at a red light, a group of people outside turned their phones toward the car. Flashlights cut through the rain. Evelyn frowned. It took her a moment to realize what was happening. Someone was recording. From the outside, it must have looked strange. A woman in an expensive car pulling a soaked boy with babies inside. She reached for the tinted window button, but it was too late. The next morning, the clip hit the internet. "Rich woman kidnaps homeless teen," the caption read. It spread like fire, short, shaky footage of her face illuminated by streetlight, the boy clutching the twins, voices shouting in the background. By the time she opened her phone, thousands of people were already arguing about what they thought they saw. In her kitchen, Evelyn stood still, reading the comments scroll by. Why would a rich lady take kids in the middle of the night? Classic PR stunt. Someone call social services. The words blurred. She turned off the screen and exhaled slowly. In the living room, the boy, Michael, he had said his name was, sat on the rug feeding the babies warm milk from bottles her housekeeper, Nora, had found. The twins were calmer now, wrapped in soft towels. Their cheeks had color again. Nora crossed her arms, watching from the doorway. "Miss Grant, are you sure about this? The news is already outside. Reporters, cameras. They're saying you took them without permission." Evelyn looked at the twins. They were freezing in the rain. "What was I supposed to do?" "You could have called the police." "I didn't think they'd survive that long." Nora hesitated. She had worked for Evelyn for years and had seen her make tough decisions in boardrooms, but never anything like this. "What are you going to do now?" Evelyn pressed her hand against her forehead. "Get them checked. They need a doctor." A few hours later, at the small hospital near the waterfront, the staff whispered as soon as she walked in. The nurse at the counter kept glancing from Evelyn to the boy and the twins. The smell of disinfectant filled the air. The nurse spoke carefully. "Ma'am, we need parental consent before we can proceed." "I'll take responsibility," Evelyn said. The woman hesitated. "Ma'am, that's complicated." Before she could explain, someone outside shouted, "That's her, the woman from the video." Flashlights burst through the glass doors. Evelyn's heart sank. The reporters had followed them. She turned toward the window. Microphones, cameras, and a sea of wet umbrellas. Michael shrank back, clutching the twins tighter. "They're gonna take them," he whispered. Evelyn crouched beside him. "No one's taking anyone," she said softly, though her voice trembled. She turned to the nurse again. "Please, just help them." The doctor appeared, an older man with kind eyes. He glanced at the crowd outside, then at the children. "Bring them in," he said quietly. "We'll sort the papers later." Inside the examination room, the babies were weighed, their tiny hands examined, their temperatures checked. One had a light cough, the other was dehydrated. Nothing that couldn't be treated. Evelyn felt her chest loosen slightly. When they left, the sky had cleared. Reporters still lingered near the exit, shouting questions she ignored. Michael kept his head down, the babies asleep in his arms. Evelyn guided him gently toward the car. Back inside, the world felt distant again. The twins were safe for now. The boy was quiet, eyes half closed, but Evelyn knew something had changed. Outside, people were already judging her. Inside, her housekeeper didn't trust her decision, and deep down, a voice whispered that she might have just started something she couldn't control. She looked at the boy's reflection in the car window, small, determined, and far too grown for his age. What kind of world leaves a child to fight storms alone? The thought stayed with her all the way home. By morning, the quiet streets around Evelyn's house were anything but quiet. Vans from local news stations lined the curb, their antennas reaching toward the gray sky. Reporters spoke into microphones, repeating the same question in different tones. Why did the company director take a homeless boy and two babies home? Inside, Evelyn stood near the window, a mug of untouched coffee in her hand. She could see the flashing lights outside, the silhouettes of cameras waiting for a reaction. Her phone kept buzzing with messages, some from friends, others from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted an explanation. "Miss Grant," Nora said carefully from the doorway, "it's getting worse. They're saying you staged the whole thing." Evelyn turned, her voice calm but tired. "Of course they are. It's easier to mock compassion than to understand it." Nora hesitated. "People are questioning your judgment. The board called twice." That made Evelyn look up. The board, her company, the one thing that had kept her life structured after her husband's death. What did they say? "They're calling for a meeting this afternoon." Evelyn took a slow breath. "Fine, I'll be there." In the living room, Michael sat cross-legged on the rug, two bottles lined neatly beside him. Hope was asleep. Tiny fingers curled against her cheek, while Faith tried to grab the corner of a blanket. The boy hummed quietly, rocking her back and forth. When Evelyn walked in, he looked up nervously. "Do we have to go somewhere again?" "No," she said softly. "You can rest today." He nodded, his eyes darting toward the window where the reporters' voices leaked faintly through the glass. "They were yelling your name," he whispered. "Are you in trouble?" Evelyn crouched down beside him. "Sometimes people misunderstand good things," she said. "But that's not your fault." He was silent for a moment, then asked, "Are they going to take us?" Her throat tightened. "Not if I can help it." Later that day, Evelyn walked into the company's conference room. The long table gleamed under white fluorescent light. 12 faces turned toward her: colleagues, investors, and Rick Dalton, the man who had been waiting for her downfall since the day her husband died. Rick smiled without warmth. "Evelyn, good to see you still have time for us, considering you're the top story everywhere." She placed her bag on the table. "I assume this isn't a welcome party." He leaned back in his chair. "We're concerned. The company is built on trust. Investors are nervous. They don't understand why you're suddenly rescuing strangers in the middle of the night." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I didn't plan to make the news. I saw children freezing in the rain. I did what any human should do." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Maybe, but the media sees a woman trying to clean her image. They're calling it a publicity stunt. We can't afford that." "So you'd rather I let them die?" A murmur spread across the room. Rick didn't answer. Instead, he adjusted his cufflinks. "No one's saying that, but maybe you should take some time off. Let the situation cool." Evelyn looked around the table. "Does everyone agree?" A few avoided her eyes. Others looked down. The silence said enough. She straightened her coat. "You all built a company that sells food with a slogan about family, yet the moment someone actually acts like family, you call it a mistake." Rick smiled faintly. "Business and charity don't mix, Evelyn. You know that." She turned to leave. "Maybe that's why this company feels so empty." As she stepped out into the hallway, the noise from outside seemed louder. Reporters shouted her name again, their cameras flashing through the rain. But for the first time, she didn't hide her face. When she reached her car, she saw a reflection in the side mirror. Michael, standing at the upstairs window, holding one of the twins against his shoulder. "Then enjoy." He was watching her, unsure, afraid she might not come back. Evelyn looked up at him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Whatever storm was coming, she would face it, not just for herself, but for the boy who had stopped believing that anyone ever would. That night, the house felt different. It wasn't the cameras outside or the reporters shouting through the gate. It was quieter inside, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that hides worry. Michael sat on the floor near the fireplace, feeding Faith with a bottle. The light flickered softly on his face. Evelyn watched from the doorway, her coat still on, raindrops sliding from her hair. The board meeting had drained her, but seeing him there, still protecting those babies like they were the only thing he owned, made something shift inside her again. Something that had nothing to do with business or headlines. Nora appeared behind her. "You didn't eat," she said. "I'm not hungry." "You should be. You'll need strength if this keeps going." Evelyn gave a faint smile. "You make it sound like a battle." Nora hesitated. "Isn't it? People are saying you've lost your mind. They're waiting for you to make a mistake." Evelyn turned back toward the living room. "Then I'll just have to disappoint them." As she walked in, Michael looked up, nervous. "Did you get in trouble at your job?" She sat down beside him on the rug. "They didn't like what I did." He frowned. "Why? You helped us." Evelyn smiled, but her eyes stayed sad. Sometimes helping someone makes you the villain in other people's stories. Michael thought about that for a while, then said quietly, "You don't look like a villain." Her laugh came out soft, unexpected. "Neither do you." The twins finished their bottles and drifted to sleep, their tiny hands curled around Michael's shirt. Evelyn helped him place them in the small crib they had brought into the living room. For a moment, both of them stood still, watching the babies breathe. Evelyn broke the silence. "Michael, where's your mother?" He looked down at the floor. "She got sick." "How long ago?" "Almost a year." "And your father?" He shook his head. "Don't know him. Never did." The words were simple, but they hit Evelyn like a wave. She wanted to say she was sorry, but the look on his face stopped her. Not because he was angry, but because he had accepted too much pain for someone his age. Before she could speak again, the doorbell rang. Loud, impatient. Nora rushed to answer it, and within seconds, a woman's voice echoed through the hallway. "Child Protective Services. We need to speak with Miss Grant." Evelyn's stomach turned. She stood smoothing her hair and met the two officers at the door. One was polite, the other already skeptical. "Miss Grant," the older one said, "we've received reports of minors in your custody. We're here to check on their welfare." Evelyn nodded. "Of course, come in." Michael froze as they entered. Faith stirred in her sleep, a small cry breaking the air. The younger officer took out a notepad. "Who are these children to you?" Evelyn answered evenly. "I found them outside during the storm. The boy was taking care of his sisters. I brought them here to keep them warm." "That's not standard procedure," the man said. "No," she replied, "but neither is leaving infants on the street." The two exchanged looks. The older one crouched near Michael. "Son, do you understand what's happening?" Michael nodded slightly. "They're my sisters." "And your parents?" "My mom's gone." His voice cracked. "She said if anything happened, I should protect them." Evelyn's throat tightened. The officers stood, whispering to each other. The younger one said quietly, "We'll need to file this. The children may be transferred to foster care." Evelyn stepped forward. "You'll do no such thing tonight. They're under medical care. I'll sign whatever you need to keep them here temporarily." "Ma'am, the law..." "Boris didn't saw." "Then the law can meet me in court tomorrow, but tonight, they stay." There was something in her tone, firm, calm, unshakable. After a long pause, the officers nodded reluctantly. "We'll note your statement." When they left, Nora exhaled sharply. "That was risky." "I know," Evelyn said, her voice quiet, "but those babies won't spend another night scared." She turned to Michael, who was still standing near the crib. "It's all right," she said softly. "They're safe." He looked at her for a long moment, his lower lip trembling. "Why are you helping us?" Evelyn hesitated. The truth was, she didn't know. Maybe it was guilt, maybe loneliness, or maybe, for the first time in years, she saw something that money couldn't fix. But love could. "Because someone should have helped you sooner," she said. That night, after everyone was asleep, Evelyn sat alone in her study. The rain had returned, tapping gently against the window. She looked at her reflection in the glass. The woman who once measured success by numbers and now measured it by heartbeats upstairs. Outside, the world was still loud and cruel. Inside, 3 children were finally warm. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The following morning brought no peace. The reporters were still outside, and the noise from their cameras felt like distant thunder. Inside, the house carried a quieter storm, one made of questions no one dared to ask. Evelyn sat at the kitchen counter, a mug of coffee going cold between her hands. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the boy's face in the rain, the way his arms tightened around the babies, the fear in his voice when he thought someone would take them. Nora walked in, setting down a folded pile of laundry. "They're still sleeping," she said. "The boy, too. He must have been up half the night watching them." Evelyn nodded absently. Her gaze had drifted to the couch, where the twins' blankets were drying. A small piece of paper had slipped out from one of the folds. "What's that?" she asked. Nora frowned and picked it up. It was a crumpled receipt, or so it seemed. Until she turned it over, there was writing on the back, faint and smudged from water. She handed it to Evelyn. The words were shaky but clear. "If you ever need help, e.g." Evelyn froze. Her initials, her handwriting. She blinked, unsure at first if she was imagining it. She recognized the paper. A loyalty card from a bakery near the city market. 4 years ago, she had stopped there on her way to a meeting. She remembered a young woman standing in front of her, counting coins with trembling hands while holding a small bag of groceries. Evelyn had paid for her meal and, on impulse, scribbled her number on the back of the receipt. She hadn't thought about it again. Until now. Nora noticed the change in her expression. "What is it?" Evelyn's voice came out low. "This paper. It's mine. I wrote it years ago." Nora frowned. "To who?" "A woman," Evelyn said slowly. "She was pregnant. I told her to call if she ever needed help." They stared at each other, realization dawning. "You think?" Nora began. Evelyn nodded, her throat tightening. "That boy's mother. It has to be her." Without another word, Evelyn went to her office, searching through an old drawer she hadn't opened in years. She found the bakery's loyalty card booklet, faded and dusty. Inside was the same logo, the same font, the same paper. She sat back in her chair, heart pounding. The woman in the bakery. She had looked scared, but grateful. Evelyn remembered her smile, small and uncertain, and how she'd said, "I won't forget this." Maybe she never did. By afternoon, Evelyn was back in her car, the same black vehicle that had stopped in the rain. The city moved around her in slow motion, horns blaring, pedestrians crossing, raindrops on the windshield. She followed the faint memory of that bakery, the smell of coffee and sugar still etched in her mind. The small shop was still there, tucked between two buildings with faded blue paint. When she stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed softly. The woman behind the counter looked up, her eyes widening. "You," she whispered, "you're the lady from that night." Evelyn's breath caught. "You remember me?" The woman nodded. "Of course I do, and I remember her too. The girl you helped. She came back often after that." Evelyn leaned closer. "Do you remember her name?" The woman hesitated. "Lydia." Evelyn's chest tightened. "Do you know what happened to her?" The woman sighed. "She passed about a year ago. Complications after birth, they said. She had a boy and twin girls, sweet children. I heard the boy kept them together somehow." Evelyn's eyes burned. "He did." The woman reached under the counter, pulling out an old voicemail device. "She left this here once. I never erased it. Maybe it was meant for you." With shaking hands, Evelyn pressed play. The voice that filled the air was soft, tired, but full of warmth. "If you ever hear this, please tell the lady with the green scarf that I remember her kindness. I named one of my daughters Faith because that's what she gave me that day." The message ended with a faint click. Evelyn stood there frozen, unable to breathe. The sound of the woman's voice felt like a bridge between past and present, a stranger's gratitude finding its way back to her through time. When she finally stepped outside, the rain had returned, gentle this time, like a reminder. She looked up at the sky, water mixing with the tears she hadn't realized were falling. That woman had asked for help once. Evelyn hadn't answered, not until now. As she got into her car, she whispered to herself, "I was too late for her, but not for them." Back at home, she found Michael awake, sitting near the window, watching the rain. When he saw her, he smiled carefully, the kind of smile that hides exhaustion. "Did you go somewhere?" he asked. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, I went looking for your mother." He blinked. "You knew her?" She took a slow breath. "Not well, but once, a long time ago, I think I was meant to." Michael frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Evelyn looked toward the twins sleeping in their crib. "I think," she said softly, "your mother left something behind for both of us to finish." Michael didn't understand fully, but he saw the tears she didn't wipe away, and for the first time, he believed that maybe fate had brought them together for a reason neither of them could yet name. And Evelyn knew she had to find out what that reason was. The next day began with sunlight, but it felt cold. The storm had passed outside, yet it was still lingering somewhere in Evelyn's chest. The bakery owner's words replayed in her mind, along with that fragile voice on the recording. "Tell the lady with the green scarf, I remember her kindness." Evelyn carried that voice home like a ghost she couldn't shake. When she entered the house, Michael was in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the twins. He had made a toy out of spoons and ribbons, and the babies were laughing, hitting the spoons together as if making music. For a moment, she simply watched them. The sunlight touched their faces. It should have felt warm, but all she could think about was the woman who wasn't here to see it. "Miss Grant!" Michael looked up. "Are you okay?" She forced a small smile. "You don't have to call me that. You can just say Evelyn." He nodded shyly, eyes curious. "Did you find something about my mom?" Evelyn sat down beside him, her knees brushing the soft rug. "I did. I found the bakery where she used to go, and she left a message there." Michael's face lit up for a second, then dimmed again. "What did she say?" Evelyn took out her phone and pressed play. The quiet filled the room, followed by that gentle, tired voice. "Tell the lady with the green scarf that I remember her kindness. I named one of my daughters Faith, because that's what she gave me that day." Michael froze. The twins looked up as if sensing the change. When the message ended, the boy swallowed hard. "That's her. That's my mom." His voice cracked. "I thought I'd never hear her again." Evelyn's eyes stung. She had lived so many years surrounded by silence, and now, a stranger's voice had cut straight through it. A woman she barely knew, thanking her for a moment of kindness she had forgotten. Michael looked at her, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "She said your name?" Evelyn nodded. "She remembered. She wanted me to know." He leaned back slowly, whispering, "She always told me there were still good people. I didn't believe her, not until you stopped that car." Evelyn wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over his. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The twins babbled softly, and somewhere outside, the rain gutters dripped in a steady rhythm like the world breathing again. Later that evening, Nora came in with an envelope. "This came for you," she said. Evelyn frowned. "From who?" Nora shrugged. No return address, but it was slipped under the gate. Evelyn opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printed email chain from years ago, one she recognized immediately. It was a copy of her proposal to fund community shelters. A note was scribbled across the bottom in pen. This was never approved. Ask Rick Dalton why. Her stomach tightened. She remembered that proposal, the same program that could have supported mothers like Lydia. It had been quietly rejected, supposedly due to budget constraints. She looked closer at the signature on the final page. It wasn't hers. It was Rick's. He had canceled the funding. Evelyn sank into a chair, gripping the paper. The pieces were falling into place. Lydia had fallen through the cracks not by chance, but because someone in Evelyn's own company had pulled the floor out from under her. Nora noticed the color drain from her face. "What is it?" Evelyn handed her the page. "It was him," she whispered. "He killed that program. He signed it off while telling me it passed. That was the money meant to help women like Lydia." Nora stared at the document, then back at her. "He covered it up?" Evelyn nodded. "And because of it, a woman died trying to raise her children alone." Michael's voice came from behind them. "What does that mean?" Evelyn turned, startled that he had heard. He stood in the doorway, holding one of the babies, eyes wide. "It means," she said softly, "that someone who should have helped your mother didn't. Someone lied to keep that help from reaching her." Michael frowned, confusion and anger mixing in his face. "So she didn't have to live on the streets?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "No, she should have had a home." Silence filled the room again, the heavy kind that comes before a decision. Evelyn looked down at the paper in her hand, the ink bleeding slightly under her thumb. Rick Dalton had betrayed her trust. But worse, his greed had cost a woman her life. Evelyn rose from the chair. "He's not going to hide this anymore." Nora's voice wavered. "Evelyn, if you go public..." "I'm not afraid of a scandal," she said. "I'm afraid of staying silent again." Michael watched her, not understanding everything, but he could feel the resolve in her tone. That night, after everyone went to bed, Evelyn stood by her office window. The city lights blinked below like restless stars. On the desk behind her lay the envelope, the recording, and a single photograph of Lydia from the bakery owner's drawer. Evelyn whispered to the empty room, "You asked for help once. I'm answering now." The wind brushed against the glass. Somewhere in the darkness, a plan had begun to form, one that would expose the truth, protect the children, and finally bring justice for the woman whose kindness had once been a mirror of her own. And as the rain started again outside, Evelyn knew the next storm wouldn't be something to fear. It would be one she would walk straight into. 2 days later, the city woke up to a different kind of storm. Not rain this time. Headlines. Evelyn Grant's face filled every morning broadcast, every social feed, every whisper in every hallway. But for once, she wasn't the one hiding. She had lit the match herself. It started with an email sent to every major news outlet. A quiet, direct message with attached documents. The funding proposal, the cancellation notice, the signature that belonged to Rick Dalton. She had included one short line: "When greed kills compassion, silence becomes guilt." By noon, reporters had abandoned her gate and moved to the company's headquarters instead. Cameras crowded around the glass doors, calling for Rick's response. Inside his office, Rick's perfect smile was gone. He read the leaked files, jaw tightening, while his assistant whispered that the board was calling an emergency session. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat in her living room with the twins sleeping beside her and Michael watching the television in disbelief. His small voice broke the silence. "You did that?" She nodded. "Yes, people deserve to know what happened." He frowned. "Will they believe you?" "I don't know," she said honestly, "but truth doesn't need belief to exist." Michael nodded slowly, still trying to understand what kind of courage it took to face the world like that. He looked at her with quiet admiration, a kind of trust that couldn't be spoken out loud. That afternoon, she received the call. Rick's voice came through the line, sharp and cold. "You've lost your mind, Evelyn. You think this makes you look noble? You've destroyed your reputation and the company." "I destroyed nothing," she said. "You did, the moment you signed that paper." He laughed bitterly. "You won't survive this. The board will vote you out before the weekends." "Maybe," she replied, "but at least I'll be able to sleep again." When she hung up, she let the phone rest in her palm for a moment. Her hands were steady. For the first time in years, she felt no need to defend herself. By evening, the company building buzzed with chaos. News crews blocked the parking lot. Investors demanded statements, and employees whispered in clusters. Evelyn arrived quietly, dressed in simple black, not the polished elegance people expected from her. Cameras followed her every move as she walked inside, her steps calm, measured. Rick was already waiting in the conference room with the board. His tone was clipped when he spoke. "This isn't a courtroom, Evelyn. It's business. You've put all of us at risk." She stood at the end of the long table, sunlight filtering behind her through tall windows. "Risk?" she repeated softly. "You talk about risk as if doing the right thing is bad for profit. You cut a program that would have saved lives. One of those lives belonged to a woman I met years ago. Her son and her daughters are in my home right now." The room stirred. Someone whispered, "She has children living with her?" Evelyn didn't flinch. Yes, because someone in this company failed them, and that failure started here. She pointed to the documents in her hand. "These signatures prove it." Rick's face hardened. "You're twisting this for sympathy." "No," she said. "I'm showing you what real leadership looks like. Not spreadsheets, not profits, but people." There was a long pause. Then she turned toward the glass door, where the faint outline of cameras waited beyond the security line. "The world is watching, Rick. If we don't own our mistakes, they will own us." Rick slammed his hand on the table. "You're finished." Evelyn's voice stayed calm. "Maybe, but at least I'll finish as someone who told the truth." She turned and walked toward the door, but before she stepped out, she paused and looked back at the men who had built their fortunes on silence. "You know what's ironic?" she said quietly. "The same company that preaches family almost destroyed one." Outside, the flash of cameras met her like lightning. A reporter shouted, "Miss Grant, are the stories true? Did your company cut programs for families in need?" Evelyn looked straight into the lenses. "Yes," she said simply, "and people suffered because of it. But today, that ends." The crowd went silent for a moment, the kind of silence that holds its breath before history shifts. Later that night, she returned home exhausted. Nora met her at the door. "It's everywhere," she said. "Some people are calling you reckless, others brave." Evelyn smiled faintly. Both can be true. In the living room, Michael was watching the news. When she appeared on screen, standing tall among the noise, he grinned. "You didn't let them scare you." Evelyn sat beside him, her eyes soft. "No, fear only wins if you stop moving." He nodded slowly, thoughtful. "What happens now?" She glanced at the sleeping twins and then at the storm of headlines flashing across the screen. "Now," she said, "we see what truth can really change." Outside, the night air carried a calm drizzle, washing away the noise of the day. But Evelyn knew this wasn't the end. It was the moment before the next reckoning, the one where the world would decide whether truth was enough. And, somewhere deep inside, she was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, the city felt awake in a way it hadn't before. Everywhere Evelyn looked, screens were flashing her name. Talk shows debated her motives, articles dissected every word of her statement. And outside the company's building, people stood with handmade signs, some defending her, others demanding her resignation. But she didn't hide. She walked straight into the same building where every rumor began, her steps steady, her heart clear. She had one thing left to do. Inside the boardroom, reporters had been allowed in for the first time. Cameras were set up, microphones fixed, lights blinding. The company had decided to host a public press conference to clarify recent events. A polite word for damage control. Rick Dalton sat at the far end of the table, a rehearsed smile on his face. When Evelyn entered, the room stirred. She wasn't wearing her usual business armor, no diamond earrings or designer heels, just a plain gray suit and a small silver pendant that once belonged to her husband. Rick stood. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that our goal today is transparency." Evelyn cut him off softly. "Then let's start with the truth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rick's smile tightened. "Of course, but perhaps we should—" Evelyn laid a stack of papers on the table. "This is the email chain confirming that you canceled the community support fund. You called it non-essential spending. The woman who died because of it, her name was Lydia. She had 3 children. They are alive because of the kindness of strangers, not because of this company." The room fell silent. Reporters began scribbling notes. Rick tried to speak, but Evelyn continued, her voice steady, unwavering. "For years, we built our reputation on compassion, yet behind the slogans, we let greed decide who was worth saving. Not anymore." Rick laughed nervously. "Evelyn, this is emotional manipulation. You can't." But before he could finish, the door at the back of the room opened. Michael stepped in, holding Faith in his arms, while Nora followed, carrying hope. The sudden appearance of the children drew every camera in the room toward them. Evelyn turned, surprised but calm. "Michael," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" He walked up beside her. His voice was small but steady. "You said people should know the truth." The room watched in silence. Rick frowned, clearly annoyed. "Who is this?" Evelyn met his gaze. "This is Lydia's son." Michael looked at the reporters, then at the sea of faces waiting for something to write down. He took a shaky breath. "My mom worked hard. She tried to get help, but no one listened. She said there was a lady with a green scarf who helped her once. She said if we ever met her again, we'd be safe." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "That lady was her, Miss Evelyn. She found us in the rain. She didn't ask who we were. She just helped." The sound of cameras clicking filled the room like thunder. Evelyn rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. Michael swallowed hard. "People say she did it for fame, but I know what it's like when no one helps you. She didn't do it for herself. She did it because that's who she is." One of the babies stirred in Nora's arms, making a soft cooing sound. The room stayed quiet, moved by the simple honesty of the boy's words. Evelyn looked around at the faces before her. Executives, journalists, strangers. "This company forgot what it means to care," she said quietly. "But this boy reminded us." Rick's voice broke the silence, sharp and bitter. "This is a show. You're using a child to cover your mistakes." Evelyn turned toward him, her expression calm but cutting. "No, Rick. You use power to cover yours." He glared at her. "You think this will change anything? You'll still lose everything." Evelyn looked at Michael and the twins, then back at Rick. "Maybe I'll lose the company," she said, "but I won't lose myself." A wave of murmurs spread through the room. The cameras flashed again, brighter this time, as though the light itself was on her side. Rick tried to leave, but one of the reporters called out, "Mr. Dalton, did you sign off on those cuts?" Another followed. "Do you deny the documents?" Within seconds, the questions turned into a storm he couldn't escape. Evelyn took Michael's hand and led him toward the exit, the twins close behind. As the doors opened, the noise of the city rushed in. Loud, alive, real. Outside, people were no longer shouting in anger. Some were clapping. Others simply watched in silence. Evelyn didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Michael looked up at her. "Are we okay now?" She squeezed his hand gently. "Not yet," she said, "but we're getting there." They walked towards the car as the drizzle returned, the same kind that had brought them together. The boy glanced up at the gray sky, then at the woman beside him, the one who had turned a night of fear into a story the whole world could finally hear. And, as they drove away, Evelyn looked through the rain-speckled window and whispered to herself, "This time, truth didn't break us. It brought us home." Days passed like ripples after a storm, quiet, but carrying weight beneath the surface. The press conference had ended, yet the world was still echoing with Evelyn's words. Some called her reckless, others called her brave, but none could deny that what she did had forced people to look at themselves. Inside the company, change was spreading faster than gossip. The board called for an independent audit, investors demanded Rick's resignation, and employees whispered about the day truth walked through the front door. Evelyn didn't attend the meetings anymore. She didn't need to. She had already said everything that mattered. On a Friday afternoon, she sat in the backyard with Michael and the twins. The sun was soft. The air smelled like rain had just left. Michael was teaching the babies to stack wooden blocks, their laughter floating through the garden like music. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt peace that didn't come from control. It came from love. Nora came outside holding a phone. "You should see this," she said gently. Evelyn wiped her hands on a towel and took it. The screen showed a live broadcast from the company headquarters. Reporters were gathered around the front steps, and standing before them was the new acting chairwoman. Her voice was steady as she spoke. Following an internal investigation, Mr. Rick Dalton has been found responsible for falsifying budget reports and obstructing community aid programs. Effective immediately, he has been removed from his position and barred from holding any future executive role. Evelyn watched quietly. She didn't cheer or smile. She just exhaled, a long, slow breath she'd been holding for years. Michael looked up at her. "Did you win?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "No, Michael, we didn't win. We just made things right." He nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but sensing the meaning in her tone. Later that evening, she received a call from one of the board members, an older woman named Clara who had always admired her strength but never spoken up before. "Evelyn," Clara said, her voice warm, "the board voted. They want you back as chairwoman." Evelyn was silent for a moment. "I appreciate that, but I think it's time I build something different." "Something different?" "Yes," she said, "something that doesn't need saving to be good." When the call ended, she sat on the porch, watching the twins chasing fireflies in the yard. Michael was helping them, laughing as the tiny lights flickered around their hands. The scene looked simple, almost ordinary, but to her, it was everything she had been fighting for. A week later, she gathered them all in the living room. The fireplace glowed faintly behind her. On the coffee table lay a stack of folders and a single-frame photograph of Lydia, smiling, holding a baby in each arm. Evelyn looked at Michael. "Do you know what your mother wanted most?" He shook his head. She wanted her children to grow up safe, to have choices, to never beg for what they deserve. She handed him one of the folders. Inside were papers, legal ones printed and signed. "I made it official today. You're under my guardianship. You and your sisters, you have a home now, permanently." Michael's mouth opened slightly. His eyes shimmered with disbelief. "You mean we stay here forever?" She nodded. "If you want to." He didn't answer with words. He just stood up, crossed the small distance between them, and hugged her tightly. His small voice was muffled against her shoulder. "I already decided that the first day you stopped your car." Her heart ached in the best way possible. She held him, her eyes closing as the twins giggled nearby. That night, when the house grew quiet, Evelyn walked into her study, the same room where she had once built empires, drafted contracts, and chased perfection. She opened a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper, her resignation letter. She had written it days ago before the board called her back. At the bottom of the page was her final line: "Sometimes stepping down is the only way to rise again." She placed it on the desk and smiled softly. Then she reached for another file, the new project that had been growing in her heart. It was titled the Lydia Foundation for Women and Children. As she looked at the name, tears welled in her eyes, not from grief this time, but from gratitude, for a boy brave enough to speak, for a woman she never truly met, but who changed her forever. And for the second chance she hadn't known she needed. The sound of tiny footsteps came from the hallway. Michael peeked in, his voice sleepy. "You're still working?" She smiled. "Just finishing something important." He walked over and rested his head against her arm. "You work too much." "Maybe," she whispered, "but this work is different. This one's for your mom." He smiled, eyes half closed. "She'd like that." Evelyn brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "I think she would too." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of the city. Cars, voices, life moving on. And, for once, Evelyn didn't feel left behind by it. She felt part of it again. As she turned off the lamp, she whispered into the quiet room, "Rest now, Lydia. Your children are home." 3 years later, the mansion didn't feel like a mansion anymore. It felt like a home. Laughter echoed through the hallways that once held only silence. The marble floors, once polished to perfection, now had tiny scratches from toy cars. The living room walls were covered in children's drawings, crooked hearts, stick figures, and a few messy attempts at spelling mom. Evelyn never erased a single one. Michael had grown taller, his voice had changed, deeper now, but still gentle. The twins, Faith and Hope, were 5 and full of energy, chasing each other across the garden, their laughter spilling into the evening air. Evelyn watched from the porch, a cup of tea warming her hands. The sunset spread over the sky in colors she used to be too busy to notice. Nora came outside carrying a small envelope. "This came for you," she said with a smile. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside was an invitation from the city council. The Lydia Foundation has been nominated for the Community Impact Award. Her eyes softened. She looked out at the children and whispered, "We did it." That night, they all went together to the award ceremony. It was held in a small hall, nothing grand, but beautiful in its simplicity. Teachers, doctors, and social workers filled the room. When Evelyn's name was called, she stood up, surprised when Michael nudged her hand. "You have to go," he whispered. "Mom would be proud." Evelyn walked to the stage, the spotlight warm on her face. She took the award, a crystal plaque engraved with Lydia's name, and looked out at the audience. "This," she began softly, "is not an award for success. It's a reminder of what love can rebuild." Her voice grew steadier. "Years ago, I thought power meant control. I thought success meant silence. Then one day, I stopped my car in the rain, and everything I believed about life changed." People leaned forward, listening. "I met a boy carrying 2 babies, shivering and alone. I didn't know then that they would become my family. I didn't know that by helping them, I'd be saving myself too." The crowd was quiet. Even the air seemed still. Evelyn looked down at the award in her hands. Lydia was a woman the world forgot, but today, her name is here where everyone can see it. That's the power of kindness. It outlives us. When she stepped down from the stage, Michael met her halfway. "You sounded brave," he said, grinning. She smiled. "So do you every time you speak for others." Months later, Michael stood in front of his new high school's auditorium. He was giving a speech on resilience. Evelyn sat in the front row, hands clasped, watching him. "My name is Michael," he began, "and I used to think I was born into the wrong life. But now I know. I was just waiting for the right person to stop and see me." He glanced at Evelyn. "Sometimes we can't choose what happens to us, but we can choose what we carry forward. Love or bitterness, hope or regret. My mom chose hope, and so did the woman who saved me." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, but she didn't hide them. That evening, after the applause faded and the kids were asleep, Evelyn went back to the place where it all began. That same old street corner where rain once blurred everything she thought she knew. The traffic lights glowed softly against the wet pavement. She stood there for a long moment, umbrella in hand, listening to the sound of the rain. The world had changed around her, but somehow this spot still felt sacred, not because of what she lost that day, but because of what she found. Michael's voice echoed in her memory. "You stopped your car." Yes, she thought, I did. Because sometimes stopping, even for a stranger, is how the story begins. She turned to leave, her reflection fading in a puddle beside the curb. The lights of passing cars shimmered across it like quiet blessings. When she reached home, the twins were asleep on the couch, their small hands still clutching crayons. Michael was reading on the floor, the same boy she'd once found in the rain, now dreaming of college and a future he built from nothing. Evelyn sat beside him, brushed his hair gently, and whispered, "You were never a burden. You were a gift." He smiled without opening his eyes. "I know." Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and endless, not as a storm this time, but as a song. And in that quiet, Evelyn understood. Life doesn't always give second chances. But sometimes if you dare to stop, to listen, and to love, it gives something better, a new beginning. She looked toward the window where the city lights glowed faintly through the mist. "Tell me," she whispered to the night, "do you believe that kindness can rewrite destiny?" Then she smiled, because in her heart, she already knew the answer. Thank you for watching. This was Power and Karma.